Hey, welcome back to Big Riff Energy. This is episode 11, part 2 in the making of Curse of Conception. I like breaking these up into multiple episodes because after recording the last one, it started really pulling some memories out of me. And I've been able, since the last episode, to really nail down the timeline of when this album was written and recorded and supported through live performances. First of all, I want to remind you, tickets are on sale now for our tour with Midnight and Spider, spiritadrift.com/tour. Get them now before it's too late. A lot of these shows are all ages, and it's some smaller venues, so some of these shows will sell out for sure. Get tickets now. Okay, Curse of Conception. That last episode, I kind of recorded completely unprepared in the midst of all kinds of other shit that's going on, preparing for the Midnight Tour announcement and making sure that on sale went smoothly and working on music videos and booking hotels for the tour and ordering merch for the tour. And I was having a little bit of a tough time nailing down the timeline and really remembering when I wrote stuff, when we recorded stuff. I don't know why I didn't put the damn liner notes in front of me. I've got them here today. I've got a ton of flyers. If you're just listening to this, it might be worth watching it because it's pretty cool. I got a lot of visual aids prepared for this episode. So, Curse of Conception, just for the record, it was recorded. I could have just had this in front of me last episode. April 25th to May 3rd, 2017 in Phoenix, Arizona. I mentioned in previous episodes, the first album, Chained to Oblivion, was recorded in October of 2015. So that's quite a gap. And that's one of the frustrating things if you're an impatient person about making albums and releasing albums is what the general public is experiencing is not what we're experiencing. It takes forever. That's a huge gap. That's the second biggest gap between albums. First one being our new album, Ghost at the Gallows. So, last episode I mentioned in August of 2016, I was on tour with Baroness and Pallbearer when I had this weird idea of making an album with the same sort of arc as Ride the Lightning, Master Puppet's first two Ozzy albums, and there's a bunch others that sort of follow the same dramatic arc. For sure, I had some songs written at that point. I believe Spectral Savior was the first song that I wrote and demoed for Curse of Conception. And I remember with that one, I wanted a doom song. I wanted a really doomy intro reminiscent of the earlier material. But then for the main chunk of the song to be more like Trouble or Pentagram, like a more rockin' sort of upbeat traditional doom vibe. The chorus at first was different. I remember the guitar part was sort of reminiscent on something from Amorphous, Tales from the Thousand Lakes, and I sort of switched it around. Then it became more reminiscent of the Phantasm theme, and I thought, what the hell? That's kind of a funny nod to Entombed as well. And I distinctly remember having an idea for the outro. I was Ubering and I heard Land Down Under by Men at Work, and it has that chord progression that's been used in every huge chorus since Mozart. You know, I somebody with a better off the top of their head knowledge of music theory can tell you what it's like, a 1/4 something 5 or something. There's videos on YouTube of guys just playing that chord progression over and over and then singing the choruses of like 100 different songs. It's Don't Stop Believin', same chord progression. It's one of those chord progressions that works. And I remember hearing Land Down Under and I was like, man, for such a goofy song, this really has some powerful emotional weight to it, just the music. And that became the outro of Spectral Savior, taking that whole deal from a minor key to this huge uplifting major key thing. And that's been a constant theme of Spirit Adrift's music is I used to say it has to be pretty heavy, meaning I want it to be pretty and heavy at the same time. And I think that's something that's been constant through Spirit Adrift's music. Spectral Savior I sort of looked at as a way to bridge the gap between the first couple of releases and the new-ish direction. But I will say, as I mentioned on an earlier episode, even the first EP has some glimpses of like early Metallica, High on Fire, maybe even Celtic Frost. The first album, the last track on it, Hum of Our Existence, towards the end of that, we're even getting sort of into like death, spiritual healing territory, progressive, busy left hand stuff on the guitar, busy drums. So that's always been there. And I just leaned a little more into it, starting with Curse, because I was wanting to push myself as a player and a songwriter and also have more fun if and when we're going to play these songs live. So Spectral Savior, I think, was the first one I wrote. I think the next one probably would have been To Fly on Broken Wings, which that song and Onward Inward are both in drop A. The rest of it's in drop B. And that's why those two songs are probably the two heaviest sounding songs up to that point. But so back to August 2016, this is crazy. Looking back on like 2016 through 2018 in preparation for this episode, I don't know how any of this is possible. I'm on tour with Baroness and Paul Bear. I remember having the general concept of what Curse of Conception is going to be as a whole. And I probably had 2 or 3 songs written at that point. Get back from that tour, go on tour with Gatecreeper, Skeleton Witch, Iron Reagan, Oathbreaker. Come home in the middle of that tour. That's why we didn't do the whole thing. We dropped off in Denver and I came home to get married. And then the week after I got married, we played a fest in Mesa. I'm still working on Curse of Conception in the midst of all of this. November and December, I'm home doing a lot of writing. Onward Inward, that song, I have a distinct memory of being in the guest room at the tiny little house my wife and I were living in and demoing the outro to that song with all the layers of vocals and almost creating that like one-man choir effect. And I remember really feeling overcome with emotion when I did that. I just felt it was just raw. It sounded really good to me, but it also just felt really good. I knew I had something special. The outro to Onward Inward is still one of my favorite pieces of music I've ever made. So I remember doing that around that time. On that Skeleton Witch tour, as I mentioned, I walked into the hotel in Gainesville and had Earthbound. That must have been one of the last songs that I wrote. I know in November of 2016, I can remember because it was around the time of the presidential election, I was working on Starless Age. So I think that might have been the last song. Wanted a track 4 ballad, just like a lot of the classic metal albums have. And I remember working on those guitar harmonies in the verse. That was probably the most difficult guitar stuff in a Spirit Adrift song up to that point. And I just remember looking at the shape of things during that election and just thinking that we were doomed and kind of wanting us to be doomed. That's still in me a little bit. So I wrote a song about that, just the extinction of the human race, which has also been a recurring theme throughout Spirit Adrift's catalog. So November, December 2016, a lot of writing, a lot of demoing. I'm sure of that. January 2017, Gatecreeper goes on tour with Of Feather and Bone, still great buddies. That was a good time. Got home. I'm sure I was tuning up the demos, working on the songs. Now here's where it got stressful. March 2017, we go on tour with Nails. And then looking at my liner notes, we recorded, we get back from that tour probably April 2nd, 2017. We go into the studio April 25th, 2017. We finished recording Curse of Conception on May 3rd, 2017. We go on tour, Gate Creeper, Pallbearer, Enter Arma, May 11th, 2017. I'm getting stressed out just thinking about it. I'm not even having to do it. I already know I did it and it worked, but Jesus. I remember having a conversation with Sanford before that Pallbearer tour about what headphones I should get, because he was going to send me mixes while I'm in the van on tour. And I remember, I think I had a early mix, or maybe just an unmixed version of the recording on that first day of tour. I remember sitting in the van driving from Phoenix towards Tucson to that first show in Houston and listening to Curse of Conception for the first time and really being blown away by it. I wish I could still feel that way about it. So we get home, in the middle of that tour with Pallbearer, May 15th, Spirit Adrift played its first show. We probably played a song from Curse of Conception, maybe one. Can't remember. So that was our first show, May 15th. We get home from that tour. Spirit Adrift flies to Denver, June 23rd for the True Brewing Bacchanal. That was the first time I saw Eternal Champion. I believe Vastum played. Yeah, the next day. Saw Vastum the next day. That was killer. We get home from that. I'm pretty sure there was some recording going on at some point in there, maybe July or so. Then Spirit Adrift plays its third show, Sunday, August 6th in Vegas with Pallbearer. That was a good time. So we're playing songs from Curse of Conception at this point. Then we played another show, August 24th in Tucson with Pelican and Enter Arma. Enter Arma is, of course, one of my favorite bands. And then Gate Creeper went to Europe in September of that year. What I remember about that tour in relation to Curse of Conception is, well, first of all, we all almost died on that tour. We all got food poisoning, and it was horrific. I thought Chase was going to die, and Eric wasn't having a great time. I didn't eat as much of the doner kebab as some of the other guys, and I didn't feel good at all, so I can't imagine what they felt like. But London, the Black Heart, I remember sitting downstairs. This is September 18th, 2017, and we saw that Spirit Adrift had gotten the Decibel lead review with the cartoon. I'll never forget that. It was such a great feeling. It's a really good cartoon, too. If I can find it, I'll put it up on the screen. Got a great review. So we were excited at this point, and the record was about to come out. We came home from that Gate Creeper tour, played the Curse of Conception album release at one of my favorite venues, Yucca Tap Room in Tempe, Saturday, October 7th. And then we couldn't get away from Denver, flew back to Denver the next week, October 14th, played with Chemist and Abrams, and that was sort of our home away from home album release. So I'll get back to the touring thing later, but that's kind of the shows that we did in support of Curse of Conception. So I talked a little bit about the writing process on some of these songs. Graveside Invocation, I remember working out the clean bridge and trying to figure out what to do on the drums and putting the 3/6 Mafia hi-hat beat on the drum part there. I thought that was cool. I'll talk about Wakian. Here's another thing about this album. I tried to drop as many hints as I could to the Master of Puppets thing. just little like winks here and there. The song titles, for one thing, they're either the same amount of words and or same amount of syllables. You know, the thing that could not be, should not be, To Fly on Broken Wings. It almost sounds like the same title. These are little hints. This is the type of fun that I have to have with this sort of stuff. Starless Age, parentheses, enshrined. Why you got parentheses in your song title? It's a nod to Welcome Home, Sanitarium. And what I learned, I mean, dude, even the cover art, it's got hands coming out at you. Wake In, I was trying to think of one cool word. You know, they have Orion. Wake In is a nod to the band Wake from Arkansas, who I'll talk about later. I think it's like an old Scottish word that means wake. But what I realized about all this, all these little inside jokes that I'm doing for myself, and all these nods and all this, really putting attention into like subconscious elements of this, is very few people, as it turns out, are as obsessed with all this kind of stuff as I am. There are two people that sort of connected the dots, not insulting anybody's intelligence or anything like that. I just think in general, nobody cares about this as much as I do. But there were two people that figured out the Master of Puppets connection. One is a guy, Paul from Michigan, who I hope is listening. What's up, Paul? Plays in a band called Theandric. And he showed up to a show in Detroit and started asking me about that. And I was like, yeah, you got it figured out. And then there was another guy in, I believe, Argentina who writes for, I hope I got that right, man, somewhere in South America, who writes for a magazine down there and connected the dots. He actually put Divided on a list of like best metal albums ever, which I couldn't believe. But yeah, Curse is Master of Puppets and Divided is Ride the Lightning, as far as the sequencing and the dramatic arc. And there's two people other than me that figured it out. If somebody else figured it out and you're slipping my mind, I apologize. But so Wake In, I was going to talk about that song. I wanted an instrumental, obviously, and I got a mandolin. Had no idea what the real actual tuning should be for a mandolin. I heard something in my head that I was trying to recreate on this instrument that was unfamiliar to me. So I tuned it to a tuning that's not a real tuning. I don't even remember what it was, simply to facilitate what I was hearing. That's all a nod to Wake. This album behind me, Voices of Omens, which I'll talk about later, opens with a mandolin, real creepy, spooky stuff, sort of illustrating the dirty South, but also mystical, haunted element of Arkansas. And I got an email from my friend Eli from Arkansas, who just sort of thanked me for like still carrying the spirit of the Ozarks in this music. And I don't even think I can help it, man. Those years in Arkansas were so instrumental in so many ways that it's just in me forever now. But Wake In is definitely like the most direct nod to that spooky, haunted Arkansas thing. Onward Inward is like, you know, more of the metaphysical stuff. Title track. I haven't talked about the title track. I wanted to do an epic, sprawling song with a lot of changes. I remember distinctly that I was dead set on the intro being really weird and proggy with atypical time signatures. I wanted to get out of the 4/4 time signature and the 3/4 time signature because the title track on Master of Puppets has some weird time signatures. Some of the stuff they're doing is between time signatures. You know who else is good at that? Is Deadbird. There's a reason on the title track of Curse of Conception, before we hit some of those, I guess you would call it the pre-chorus, the really heavy, it lingers, it holds and it lingers, and it's on a human time signature. It's not confined to any set time signature. And that comes from seeing Deadbird so many times holding and sustaining these really dramatic parts, and then they all come crashing in on their own time, but it creates this magical, uplifting rush of human emotions. And I always admired that a lot about Deadbird. I think they're one of the best bands ever at doing that. What I remember about the studio, and I know we have people interested in gear. As soon as Sanford saw the diesel amp, he was like, that's what we're using. So we used a diesel for guitars. We even used it for clean guitars. And we loved it so much, and Sanford loved it so much that he bought one and had it shipped to his house while we were recording this album. So I know we used the diesel. I was using ESP guitars at the time. I think I had a V that was tuned down to drop A for Broken Wings and Onward Inward. I went to Guitar Center and got a bass. There's a loophole, or there was, in the Guitar Center policy where you can return something within a certain amount of time for pretty much any reason at all. So if you needed something for the studio or for a short tour or whatever, just go to Guitar Center. I'm pretty sure I bought a Aerodyne bass or a P bass or something and got it set up, tracked the songs with it, and then returned it to Guitar Center. I remember they tried to ask me what was wrong with it, and I was like, I just don't like it. Got my money back. Used Marcus's drums, Ludwig's. One really fond memory I have of the drumming was doing the intro to Curse with all those big fills and stuff. And I want to do a quick cymbal grab, kind of like Tommy Aldridge. TJ from Inner Arma is really good at it too, grabbing cymbals in the middle of crazy fills. And I just couldn't, I was not good enough technically to grab that cymbal. And so I had Marcus come in the room, and we practiced it a couple times, me doing the fill, hitting the crash, and him just grabbing the crash. It was a lot of fun, man. We were just making it happen, you know. I remember him teaching me how to do certain stuff too on Graveside Invocation on the chorus. I'm on the ride, you know, and have to hit a crash as an accent at some point, and I was doing it with my right hand, which meant I was coming off of the ride cymbal. And I remember him coming in on the talkback, hey, do that crash with your left hand. And I had to like relearn the part to incorporate the crash with my left hand. It was good times. Marcus didn't need any kind of help because he's an actual real drummer, unlike me. I'm trying to think of other memories. Earthbound, the chorus, I remember doing keyboards with Sanford and being like, I want it to sound like the Terminator theme. I want that sound, Terminator theme. And we were going through all these different sounds on the synthesizer, and we hit this sound, and, you know, it's not exactly the Terminator theme, a little more modern and refined, but it's in that realm of, you know, we talked about Blade Runner a lot, and of course, Tangerine Dream and old sci-fi soundtracks and that sort of stuff. And I remember hearing Earthbound for the first time, that chorus, as I was playing the synthesizer, and it just had all these extra melodic layers, and man, just loving it. That was, at the time, you know, I sort of disparaged the album a little bit last episode, but at the time, that was the most excited I've ever been about any material that I've worked on, and we were all just feeling so good about it. I remember the first time we listened to the playback of Starless Age, going from the verse into the chorus with that chug buildup, and when it hit, just looking around the room, and it was just like an electrifying experience. And everybody was there every day of recording, and that's rare. That doesn't happen very often, but every single person involved was fully invested. And it was a great time. I remember going and getting some barbecue. We thank this place, the thanks list in this album is hilarious. Danky's was the Danky's was the barbecue spot. around the corner. And I remember going there and sitting down and looking across the table at Sanford. And I said something like, hey, man, I know you've worked on too many damn records. You've worked on a lot of records. So I don't know how you feel about it. At a certain point, it's a grind. And people that make records for a living, a lot of them, they don't even really get to listen to music for enjoyment because you're fried. Like being in the studio for 12 hours a day, it fries your circuits, man. It makes it hard to listen to anything other than maybe ambient noise or something completely different than what you're working on. But I asked Sanford, do you think we're making something special here? And without hesitation, I'll never forget, he said, yeah, for sure. Just as matter-of-factly as you can imagine. And Sanford's one of the nicest guys in the world. So I think even if he didn't think that, he would have said yes. But I believed him, and I still believe him. I think it is a special record. I got a email from Tim, the Arkansas Tim, the world-famous Tim that I've mentioned on this podcast, asking about Spectral Savior in particular and why I was able to be a little more vulnerable and a little more straightforward with that song. That song's about growing up without a mom, man. Losing your mom at 4 months old. And I made Curse of Conception when I was, 29? So I wrote that song when I was 28. And at some point I realized at 28 years old that I was older than my mother ever was. And that is a trip. That is a trip. And I've never been a woe is me type person about that because it wouldn't be true. I was 4 months old when she died. I did have a relationship with her, but not one that I remember, which is weird. It's just a weird thing to go through. I'm sure people listening to this have experienced something like that. Somebody has, and it does something to you, man. And a lot of that stuff, your teens and your 20s. I've talked to a dear friend in one of my favorite bands who's gone through the same thing. And your teens and your 20s, you don't give a fuck. You don't give a fuck. It does something to you. My best friend growing up in high school went through the same thing, and it does something to you. Losing a parent, at any age, but especially before your adult years, man, I wasn't able to realize what it did to me until later, but that trauma manifests itself in so many different ways. And some people, it softens them and makes them way more kind and caring and calm. I think it made me more empathetic for sure. And I'd like to think that in my heart, I'm a kind person, but certain people, that sort of trauma will make you fucking insane. And it did that to me for a huge chunk of my life. And it's the type of behavior that you're not able to really put your finger on why you're doing it, or you don't even think about why you're doing it until you're able to look at it in retrospect. And that's what Spectral Savior is about, man. Growing up different, growing up with a hole in you that is there forever. You can mend it and live with it and truly be happy once you figure out how to deal with it. But it's always there, So that's what that song's about. I didn't have any problem being upfront with that because that's something that's mine. That's something that's mine. There's other themes on this album, family tragedies and stuff like that involves other people and other families. And so it's a little more cryptic, and it's not stuff that I talk about openly. But it's equally important in my life. So it's on here. I looked at this when I pulled the liner notes out, dedicated this album to Brenda No Garrett and William Patrick Garrett. That's my mom and my uncle. And like I said, the last time I spoke about this album. It's raw, man. It's you know, I do stuff that resembles cognitive behavioral therapy, but I've never gone to one-on-one therapy or anything like that. And this album and the first two releases, I processed a lot of stuff. It's and that's what I do with these albums. I'm not interested in writing about dragons and fucking stabbing people, and you know, I write about war and the apocalypse and stuff like that occasionally, but there are external wars and external apocalyptic events that mirror the internal wars and the internal end of the world events that happen inside all of us too. So it's every single one of these albums, it's like a way to cope and a way to get this stuff out in a healthy way. And I've watched all the Mastodon making of documentaries for all their albums, and every one of them, they say the same thing, especially Emperor of Sand. Like, they say, you know, this music is a way for us to take the tragedies and the challenges of life that we all are inevitably going to have to face, and take that pain and put it into something beautiful. And the real artists do that. It's cute and funny and cool to write songs about, you know, homicidal maniacs and vampires and zombies and aliens and shit like that. And there's a way to do that where it's a metaphor for something real, but I can't help but put my whole self into these songs and this music. So Tim, that's Spectral Savior. You know, I was watching Joey Diaz's podcast around the time I wrote that song. Joey Diaz, for those of you who don't know, he's a comedian, podcaster, and almost sort of half-assed like life coach. He's one of my favorite dudes. I've got to meet him a couple times, but you know, he lost his mom when he was young and has spoken about it extensively. And around the time I was writing Spectral Savior, I was watching his podcast, and he said something about, it's like for the rest of your life, there's no salt on your food. He was talking about how it's just, everything is a little bit duller and a little bit, that's how he described it. It's like eating food and you can't put salt on it. So it's just missing a little bit of flavor. I lost my mom at such a young age. I don't know the alternative. So maybe I'm okay. Maybe I would have had a different experience, sensory and emotional experience with life had things been different. I'm sure I would. But this music helped me get through it, man. And yeah, everything else aside, any sort of external metric of success or anything like that, the point of this music is to help myself and help others if I can. That's it. That's the bottom line. I want to help as many people as I can and help myself in the process and make music because I feel like that's my purpose on this earth. So I hope that answers your question, Tim. So after we recorded this, we played some of those shows that I mentioned earlier. And then there was the Cannibal Corpse Power Trip Gatecreeper Tour. This was right after Curse of Conception had been released. And for sure, I was writing songs on Divided by Darkness by the time that Cannibal Corpse tour happened. Because I remember I was listening to In the Light by Led Zeppelin, and I had just read a book about Led Zeppelin talking about how Jimmy Page moved into Aleister Crowley's mansion and was practicing the occult stuff and all of that, which I had dabbled with in Arkansas, as I mentioned in a previous episode. And I remember thinking, man, for this next album, I should get back into that stuff, which was maybe the right choice artistically, but probably not a good choice as far as my personal life was concerned. As far as more shows that Spirit Adrift played in support of Curse of Conception, we went to St. Vitus Bar, played our first show in New York, January 26th, with one of my OG favorite bands from high school. Been listening to them a long time, Unearthly Trance. And then Joe from Paul Bearer did a solo synth set. And then spring 2018, both bands went to South by Southwest, March 15th through 17th. Chase and I played 6 sets in one day, one of those days. That was gnarly. And then the first Spirit Adrift tour happened with Paul Bear. And we hit Decibel Metal and Beer Fest on that tour. Spring of 2018, there was a salmonella outbreak in a batch of lettuce that killed some people. The first day driving out to San Antonio, we stopped at a Dairy Queen in New Mexico. Every time I see that Dairy Queen, I have the urge to burn it down. The guys got burgers that had lettuce on them. I got a salad. I didn't think about the salmonella outbreak. That was a near-death experience. I'll put that on the near-death experience list. I've had a few. It sucked. It sucked really, really, really bad. So I somehow managed to play that first show in San Antonio. The guys didn't start feeling it till the next day, March 26th, when a 810 was dropped on my foot along with a human being, and it snapped the bone in my foot in half. This is the first 2 days of the first Spirit Adrift tour. I didn't go to the doctor. I didn't go to urgent care. I figured there's no way my foot's broken because I'm walking on it. I'm driving. I'm loading gear. When I got home, my family forced me to go get my foot x-rayed. Turns out my foot was snapped in half, the biggest bone, whatever, the metatarsal or something, metacarpal. Put a cast on, and I was in the gym 2 days later doing squats with a cast on my foot. That's the first Spirit Adrift tour. After that, Gay Creeper went on tour with Full of Hell. We played the whole United States, I think with no days off. It looks like there's days off, but I'm pretty sure we filled those gaps. Got back in June of 2017. The record's not out yet. No way. Or yeah, it is. I'm in 2017. Shit, I'm confused, man. I'm going to stop with all that shit. Whatever, you get the point. It was a lot of touring and a lot of recording. I know I keep harping on this, but I can't believe that all of that shit happened. So, Divided by Darkness will be up next. Like I said, I distinctly remember working on that record by the time we were on the Cannibal Corpse tour. In the meantime, I'm going to talk about Rwake, Voices of Omens. This is one of my favorite records ever made. As I mentioned earlier, hugely influential on Curse of Conception. I discovered Rwake when I was still in high school, so probably 2005 or 6. I hate to say it, guys, this was during the illegal downloading times, and I kept seeing this weird band name, Rwake, but it's, how the fuck do you say it? It's Rwake. There's a whole story behind that involving the consumption of too much cough syrup and attempting to say the word wake and it coming out sounding like a caveman or a psychotic deliverance wizard. So the band is Rwake. They call it Wake. Some people call it Rwake or Rwake or whatever. I remember seeing that name in high school, and they got compared to other bands that I like, probably Mastodon. And I got a couple of their albums, listened to it, had no idea what they looked like. Couldn't really find any information about them, and just heard this crazy person music that sort of encapsulated everything I loved about extreme metal and classic metal and bluegrass and the South and psychedelic chaos and everything. I loved it. And I ended up moving to Arkansas. And the first time I saw Rwake was the album release show for Voices of Omens at Downtown Music, greatest venue to ever exist. I was 18 years old. I saw these people get on stage and they terrified me. There was a mystique and just a element of danger. And it was like a cross between the Manson Family and heavy metal parking lot on that stage. And I was like, who the fuck are these people? And are they going to hurt me? And turns out, yeah, that was the band. Like, for whatever reason, I did not expect them to look like that. I was really scared. And then they played and I was even more scared. And I loved it. It was one of the best shows I've ever seen. We all ended up becoming good buds after that. And those guys became my friends and my heroes and my mentors, and still friends with them to this day. I was talking to CT just the other day about some exciting rumblings that are going on. Just did a tour with Reed, the bass player. He works with COC on the road. And man, I don't know if there's a more important band for me. I guess Black Sabbath, but Wake and Deadbird would be right under Black Sabbath. This album is great. Check it out. It's straight up one of my favorite albums ever made. Yeah, it inspired me during the Curse of Conception days. Still inspires me today. Jeff, the drummer, who's the primary songwriter, is one of the most genius musicians that I've ever seen or known. Reed on the bass is just like a rumbling, thunderous force of controlled chaos. You know, the dual vocal attack is really unique and overwhelming. Yeah, it's just, you know what? I'm going to dedicate a whole episode or two just to talk about Wake, and maybe get some people that are involved to come here at some point, because anytime you go on tour and you run into people that were part of that circuit, you know, Yob was part of that circuit, Loss out of Nashville, Weed Eater, Bongzilla, my friend John Judkins, I've had lots of conversations with him. He's now in the band. There is a whole mythology surrounding Wake, and it is scary and intense and awesome and real and unhinged and fucking amazing. They're one of the coolest bands ever. So check out Voices of Omens by Wake. That's also the Sanford Parker connection. I was so obsessed with this album. I was reading the liner notes and talking to the guys about it, and realized that this guy, Sanford Parker out of Chicago, he was in Buried at Sea at the time, had recorded this album. So I wanted to record with him. So a lot of connections there. Very, very important album for me. Okay, that's it. Jesus, I thought that would be less rambling than the previous episode, but it probably wasn't. At least I got the dates and the timeline right. So that's the making of Curse of Conception. If Sanford ever comes down here, we'll probably do some joint episodes on that album and Divided. But I think I'll put a fork in that one for now. Let's see. Like, subscribe, share this with someone you think who would dig it. Comment, send your questions to BigRiffEnergy@gmail.com. Buy your tickets to our tour with Midnight and Spider. We will see you on the road very, very soon. Thanks.